So as we near the end of the Clone Wars, I figured now was a good time to take a closer look at a piece of infantry equipment that played a pretty major role both during and after the Clone Wars. Let's take a look at the DC-15. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So the DC-15 is the primary blaster utilized by the infantry forces of the Grand Army of the Republic. Manufactured by Blastech, it had a very brief and sparse history before the war, but as the Kaminoans began building their massive clone army and needed to outfit them, they started looking for appropriate weapons. They ultimately ended up signing a contract with Blastech for a ridiculous number of blasters, both DC-15As and a modified DC-15S. The DC-15A was a full-length rifle that would be used for longer-ranged combat, capable of engaging targets at a much longer range and putting down a pretty vicious field of fire. Meanwhile, the DC-15S would be utilized in more compact spaces, where the DC-15A was simply impractical. The DC-15S ultimately ended up sacrificing things like range and rate of fire for a more compact design that could be more easily wielded by the troopers that were using these weapons. The DC-15S would ultimately become far more popular with the clone troopers than the DC-15A because the DC-15S was more wieldy. It was easier to use. Ultimately, the A was as long as a sniper rifle and quite heavy, where the DC-15S was much more manageable, being strongly preferred mostly due to its weight and its, once again, ease of use. Both weapons, however, would remain in service within the Republic military for the entire duration of the war, and would be seen on battlefields all across the galaxy. On top of that, during the conflict, they'd be sold to several independent factions and small militia groups, which would take to using these Republic blasters, as they had seen how effective they were in the hands of the clone troopers. A few things to note is that the DC-15A also had a few advantages in the form of attachments. The DC-15A being larger meant a larger platform to mount on extra gadgets. We see during battles in the early Clone Wars, for example, that they're used to mount ascension cables that, while used on other rifles later on in the war, seem to have first appeared with the DC-15A. So let's talk about the history of these weapons after the end of the war, however. Because the end of the war brought a lot of changes, and we know the Galactic Empire eventually transitions over to the E-11, the rifle used by the Stormtroopers. So what happened to the trusty blaster of the clone forces? Well, the DC-15 would stay in service for the early years of the war, serving mainly with clone units that remained in Imperial service following the end of the conflict. And while the Empire started phasing in TK troopers to replace the clones, the TKs were initially armed with the DC-15s. After all, the Empire had a massive surplus of DC-15s they had inherited from the Republic, and had to use them somewhere, and if they were arming a massive force, this is a good starting point. It wasn't until a few years after the end of the war that they would begin being phased out for the E-11s, which posed some advantages, including being a more versatile platform for attachments and other elements that would ultimately become crucial to the operations of the Stormtrooper Corps under the Galactic Empire. The DC-15 would still pop up here and there, being used by rebel groups, for example, following the initiation of the Galactic Civil War, but it would become more and more rare as the rebel groups would favor more modern rifles as opposed to the aging Clone Wars era blasters. But as a platform, they really gained their notoriety serving with the Grand Army of the Republic, and ultimately, like a lot of pieces of Republic military hardware, they were phased out with the rise of the Empire for one reason or another. Another major batch of hardware that was phased out at the end of the war and replaced with newer Imperial equipment would be the ships of the Republic Navy. If you'd like to learn about what happened to the ships of the Republic Navy and their transition to the Imperial Navy, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments what you think is a more versatile platform for a large infantry force. The DC-15S, the shortened version of the DC-15, or the E-11, the weapon utilized by the Stormtroopers. And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.